Thank you very much. Thank you. Also welcome, warm welcome from my side. Good to have you here today. So as you can see, we're here today to give you an overview about the KPS test automation approach. So that is basically an approach of how you can successfully establish test automation in a multi-system environment, for instance. And you will learn how we do this, what are our principles, and how we move forward when we implement test automation. Hence, we have 3 agenda points for you today. First of all, we would dive into our principles. We will explain you our principles. Then after that, we will give you a short video of a demo, how it looks like when you automate a test, which is an integrated test using different systems. And then number 3 is our approach of how we tackle test automation, how we implement test automation, how we use it in our S/4HANA projects. So as Stuart already said, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to bring them in and we will answer them right away. Okay, so then let's start with the first one, our automation principles. So maybe first, before we go there, I would just, elaborate a little bit on the typical pain points of testing. So when we talk about automation, we might ask ourselves, so why automation? What's the reason? So what are the typical pain points of manual testing so that we would do automation? So based on a survey, here are a few facts. In general, it says 80% of software testing is manual, right? So just 20% of automation. So that means that basically everything you do in testing, people do manually. So that means in turn, there are slow testing cycles, of course, because it takes time and it's costly because it takes effort, right? People need to test manually and that takes a lot of effort. So it's basically high maintenance and the productivity, of course, in turn is low. On the other hand, when it comes to end-to-end testing, so integration testing, of course, there is low automation. It's hard to automate this, right? So even if there is some test automation in the wild, it's usually just functional automation. So not a lot of end-to-end integration testing. And the risk coverage, which is the last one here on the slide, is, that is mostly meant to the point that because when you do manual testing, you really have to look at the risks, right? Because there is a risk-based approach you can follow, but it's usually hard to really cover all your risks. So when you automatically test your stuff, it's easier to cover it. So that's the typical pain points. And, the question is, how can you overcome those pain points? And for us at KPS, it's just about the principles. You have to look at a few principles. And when you follow those principles, including the right tool capabilities, you can overcome those pain points and you can find a way into test automation. So here are our principles, and I will guide you through this. We will start on the upper right. It says shift left. So what does it mean? For us, it means that we thrive to start with test automation as early as possible in the process. So when we look at the project, for example, many would think test automation, maybe we start with regression testing once we're live. So that was a common thing. People said that, and yes, I think you can leverage the full power at that stage, but it doesn't mean that you cannot start earlier, and that's what we say. So you always have some processes in there. You can start early with test automation. It doesn't mean that you need to test all your integration tests, but you can use accelerators, for example. So the key message is start as early as possible and evaluate your processes and your functionalities that you might use already early in a project. The next one is the model-based test automation. So what does that mean? It means that with the right tool in place and with the right strategy in place, you should not just start automating processes. You should, follow a model-based approach. So that means that you cut your processes into different modules that are reusable. So it's easier to bring your processes together for test automation and you can reuse it. So it's easier and much, much faster to set this up. A model-based approach is not just for test automation. We also use that approach for manual testing, for instance. So reusability is the key word here for a model-based test automation approach. The next principle is the establishment of a test center of excellence, or in other words, a test governance. So it does not help just to look at test automation from a functional or from a strategical perspective. You also need to govern it. So you need to set something up, and that means that you need to have the right organization in place with roles and responsibilities. And that brings us to the next point, with roles and responsibilities that seamlessly integrate into your testing process. So your testing process is basically your concept of how you do testing and when you do testing. And it's important to include test automation into that process. So that means whenever you have new functionalities, so let's say you're in a run environment, whenever you have new functionalities, new processes or changes, you always need to consider test automation, because otherwise it wouldn't be sustainable. Because when you have changes in your processes and you don't look at the test automation, you would lose the benefit. That also includes, and that's just two things that we have on the screen here, but that's way more, that also includes the central test data management, for example. We need to make sure that test data management is at one place, so it's centralized in a central responsibility. So you can make sure that your test data is useful, not just in one system, but also in the other systems in your environment. And that's what we mean by that. Sorry. Another one is the change impact analysis. So there are tools you can use in order to measure the impact of transports, for example, or of an upgrade, transports into your system, so you can measure the impact. And if that impact analysis tool is connected to your automation tool, which includes the test cases, you can find out what's impacted. So it's easier to select what you really need to test. Now, people would think with automation, I can basically test everything. Well, that's true, but that's also effort, right? So the thing is, and that's the big benefit of it, you can analyze what's impacted, and then you would just test that. But that is more like, when you're in a run organization, so you wouldn't use that in a project like when you're in a upgrade project or in a transformation project. So that's something, that needs a little bit of more maturity for you. Last but not least is the risk-based approach. So I think I mentioned it earlier. The thing is, you can test everything, but there is certainly no need to test everything. With the right tool in place and the right strategy in place, you can do it risk-based. So based on criticality and based on complexity of your business processes, you can identify what you need to test. And that does not only apply to test automation. I think the risk-based approach is even more important, or at least equally important, when you do manual testing.
I see there's a question in the chat on when to start test automation. Starting test automation as early as possible. What is the right time in the project life cycle to start test automation? Too early creates additional effort for rework, but too late removes some of the value. What's the sweet spot in your experience?
Yes. So here comes the answer that says it depends. Yeah, but it really depends. It depends a little bit on the situation. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a greenfield S4 transformation. Yeah. And let's say you do it with us, basically, just as an example. We usually bring best practice processes into the project. And that's exactly the point. So let's say it's like even in the prepare and in the design phase where you look at that. So you wouldn't automate, but you would look at that. You would look at the processes that you have, or even best practices that your implementation partner would bring into the project. And once those best practices are customized in a way that they are executable, which is way earlier, like you would usually do in integration testing, that's the point where you would start to automate pieces. Things like creating business partners, for example, creating material master, things that would be accelerators in the process of your first manual integration testing. So it means that you wouldn't really automate your testing, in total, and that does not make sense, to be honest. But you would start with some accelerators. So that's one example. Another example would be, let's say you're a brownfield approach of a conversion, SAP, S4. You would already have processes, right? So you would start with your sandbox conversions, and based on that, you would also start already there. You would start to automate pieces of it, and then you would extend your automation with the project going on. Yeah. So as I said, it depends a little bit on the situation. That's why we said Shift F, do it as early as possible, but you need to look at that from the very beginning and see what you can do. So that's our principle, basically. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, good. All right, then let's move to the next one. And that is a speech. So it says, you've seen the principles now, our principles, basically. But any principles, they cannot work if you don't have the right tool with the right capabilities to support the principles. On the other way around, you can have the best tool in the world, but it does not work if you don't have any simple principles you would follow in order to use the tool. And that is very, very important to remember. And that's the reason why we at KPS are using Tosca. So for our principles, we decided we use Tosca because it's our best fit, to support our principles. I mean, there are many tools out there, right? So this is not marketing for Tosca, but for us and for our principles, we decided to partner with Tricentis and to use that tool. And there are a few reasons. When you look at an integrated environment, you need to make sure that your test automation tool supports it. Like I said, we want to start early. We want to do it end to end. We want to do a model-based approach. And this is all stuff, that is supported by Tosca. So it enables us to do end-to-end test automation in hybrid system landscapes. And as you see on the right-hand side, it's just an excerpt of what they support, but you can see it basically supports everything. Yeah, so basically everything. So SAP for one thing, but other big software, any kind of UI or other technologies, API testing. It integrates with tools like Jira for bug tracking. There is a lot you can use. Yeah, so it basically integrates in your environment, and for most of the clients, it should fit. And that's why we decided to use that. It also, another important thing is, so as I said, we are partners with Tricentis, and so is SAP. SAP says when it comes to automation, use Tricentis. Because it is very well integrated and it very well supports, the needs of SAP customers. And it includes not just Tosca as the automation tool, but the whole environment, the whole tool chain. You can see it on the left-hand side. So there is a change impact analysis. I mentioned that already. So Tricentis has that. Name is Live Compare. They do continuous test automation, so that's Tosca. And they also have performance test tools in their portfolio. So the big thing is they support end-to-end quality assurance. And there is one more thing. So SAP Cloud ALM. Tricentis offers a cloud-based automation. So the name is not Tosca, but it's integrated into SAP Cloud ALM. So when you're using Cloud ALM, you can automate. You just have to remember that this is just a limited functionality. So there is, I think the number of executions are limited, the number of front ends are limited. So there is a certain limitation to it. But if you are using Cloud ALM, you can use that tool. And on the other hand, you may remember from the old times that there was ECAT, which was part of SAP Solution Manager, or a component-based test automation, so the CBTA tool, which was basically the successor of ECAT. So those are tools, that become obsolete, so you wouldn't use them anymore. And on the other hand, they were very SAP-centric, so you weren't really able to automate anything else. I mean, with CBTA, I think you would even able to browse to automate browsers, but that's it, right? So you cannot do end-to-end testing, but you can do it with that tool chain that I just mentioned. And remember, SAP Cloud ALM includes a limited functionality of Tricentis test automation. So here you see a summary of the important tool capabilities that we see a tool should have in order to support a multi-system landscape automation. So on the first hand, so the very first thing is UI, so the user interface automation. The tool just must be able to automate any UI. So it does not matter if it is HTML, or whatever it is. It should automate everything. Because otherwise, if you have a multi-system environment, you wouldn't really be able to automate everything. On the other hand, API testing is quite important, because you can integrate any API in your testing. So if a tool has that capability, even better. The next one is the model and risk-based testing. So I mentioned that earlier. So you should be able to reuse what you created, because that in turn makes it faster. So imagine you have automated a module that is, to create a purchase order in SAP. So you would only have to do it once, and then in any other end-to-end process where you need to create a purchase order, just to make it simple, you can reuse it and just adapt it accordingly. So that's why it is so important to have a model-based approach in place. Almost equally or even more important is the test data management, because without any integrated test data, you cannot test integratively, not even manually. So of course, also not automatically. So the tool should be able to have at least some sort of test data management capability so that you can manage the data, or that you can include the data, so that you're able to automate your processes with different data just by using variables and filling them. And of course, it's very important that the data is, available across the system. So that's something a test automation tool cannot do, right? So that's something you need to make sure that you have integrated test data, but the automation tool can manage the data. And last but not least, well, this is really a fancy thing, to be honest, service virtualization. So I've seen it only once, to be honest, that this was used. But it's quite a powerful capability. So let's say you have hard-to-reach system, like an old mainframe system where you wouldn't even have a staging environment. So this is really hard to test, right? So you can virtualize those services in order to be able to do your end-to-end testing. So that's quite fancy. But again, this also requires some sort of maturity, and I've only seen it once. And this does not have anything to do with the tool itself. It's just another principle. It's just an example. So imagine you are very mature in manual testing. So you have many of your processes ready, and you're thinking about regression testing, just to give you an idea of a valid situation or of a real situation. So you might ask yourself, okay, how can I come from that manual process, which is manually tested, to an automated test? So the answer might be quite simple. Yeah, I have the right tool in place. So I just have to record it, and then I can automate it. But it's not as easy as that. And we also asked ourselves the same question, since we're also using test automation, not just at our clients, but also for ourselves, since we have a big platform that we need to automatically test, and even our own systems, we do testing automatically. So we thought, okay, what is a good approach of, how we can automate it so that it really makes sense, and that at the end, the result is also something that's, benefits us. And this is what I would like to guide you through, because for us, it turned out to be very beneficial. And that's a small journey, basically. So when we start in the left, you see, first of all, I called it use case. You can call it end-to-end process, whatever you like, but that's what I mean. So there is a use case that should be ready for execution. So it means it should be a process, of course, that runs somewhat manually, right? So that you can automate it better. Another prerequisite is that you have a stable test environment available, so that your test environment should be stable and integrated from a technical perspective, and also from a data perspective. So you should have data available so that you can use it. So everything basically to be able to manually execute the process in your staging or in your test environment. So what we did is we scheduled walkthrough sessions. So one session for one process, or if it is a smaller process and you have the same people, you can also do more. But the key is to have a walkthrough session. And during that walkthrough session, which is, so the participants are the functional owners. That's how I named it. So basically people who know the process or who own the process and are able to execute the process, and a test automation specialist. So they sit down and walk through the process. They will execute the process and they will record the process. And at the same time, they will discuss during that session how they would validate their results. Because as you know, a test case does have test steps and expected results. For test automation, that's not really enough. You really have to validate the results. So you have to tell the system where to look at and what to expect. And this is something very important because test automation often fails because, the expected results weren't really validated enough. So you automate a process, but you don't really look at it, right? So it runs through, fine, green. But, that's not enough. You really need to look at what you need to look in order to make sure, in order to be able to judge if the results are okay. So that's what needs to be validated. And you can do that in a session with the right people in place, and you can record that session. So the next then is, and this is not in a session, so that's the test automation specialist would build that use case in the test automation tool. And of course, if it's not the first process, so if we're more mature and we have more processes already in the system, the test automation specialist can reuse and adapt existing modules. You remember my example with the purchase order? So that's one of those examples. Once the thing is built, there will be an execution of an initial automation run and a joint validation of the results with the functional owner whom we have used to, in the session. There's a review and there is adaptation if necessary. And then, as a result, we have a automated use case with the right validated results. So this is what we did and what we still do, and which is very beneficial for us. And that's the reason why we wanted to share it with you. So when we bring that together, so there are a few success factors when you look at that process. As I mentioned, so you need a stable and integrated environment. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it. Your data needs to be consistent so that you can use it across the systems. The walkthrough sessions turned out to be really, really good. So record it if you use that approach. So because when you record it, it's easier for the test automation specialist to look at it, if there are any questions come up. So they might be answered just by looking at the video. So you wouldn't have, any follow-up alignment efforts, discussions, important people and functional owners, knowledgeable people are always hard to reach. Yeah, we all know that. So you can reduce that if you record the session. And then, of course, the plain test automation is just not sufficient. As I said, you need to validate your expected results. And that's basically most of the important topics. Yeah, personal interaction, okay, that's one thing, but the other ones are even more important. And as I said, so it's quite simple when you look at it, but it's really beneficial. So it turned out to be really good. Any questions?
Yeah, we have one in the chat on
Yes.
cross-system testing. We have a web portal creating sales orders connected to SAP via an RC connection to post and create the orders into SAP. Will
Yes.
this be possible to do in test automation?
Yes, it would. Yes, of course. I mean, you would have to automate the piece where this is created. You have to. So in automation, you would basically just start the process that does it, right? If I get your question right. And if you have like an inbound monitor for iDocs, basically, where you get your orders into the system, you can monitor that iDoc monitor, and you can use that and then process the iDocs. So yes, basically, the short answer is yes. I will hand over to Bianca now.
I will show you a short video. So we will continue the presentation with a video that shows you how Tosca actually looks like when you do a recording. So I'm doing the share. I hope you can see it.
I can validate it on my screen. Yes, we can see it.
Run. Don't worry, we don't watch the whole 6 minutes. I'm going to skip to the most important parts. But from the title of it, this is a test automation case. It's a use case of one of our best practice processes. So it's a click and reserve and store. So it's a little bit related also to the question we just had. So there is a sales order coming in. So for example, there is a click and reserve order that's created. So the screen here starts in Tosca. That's how it looks like. We have our processes here, and then the recording starts. So in this case, it starts in the web shop. So you can see the interface of the web shop that's also recognized by Tricentis. And you can also put in your details. You can put in a user. You can see the basket is filled now. Something is added to the chart. We put a store in where it's going to be delivered to in Berlin. And then there's the standard checkout that is happening. So this is all taken by Tosca. And then we go a bit further, because then, of course, the next steps after we've done our web shop is the SAP integration that I'd like to show you. So it goes now into S4, and we can verify the created sales order here. So you can see even like the desktop is recorded, and also the SAP application then. So we're going into our sales documents. We're displaying the customer reference is put in, the customer, the order number. And basically, I think you know what I'm trying to say. Like, we can also obviously record SAP here with this tool. And let's go a bit further, because we have a little bit of a, actually we're already here. The cash desk is also integrated. So even cash desk, for those who work in that area, know that this can sometimes be a bit special and tricky when it comes to cash desk integration, but also we are able actually to record that with our Tosca application. So I'm just going a bit further so you can actually see it, how it looks like here on the screen. So then there's the checkout then at the cash desk, and it's in the A4. Yeah, just so you get a little bit of a look and feel what it looks like. Then let's skip a bit further. So this is all in SAP. And then we actually, once we are done with it, we can execute it, and then we can also see the test results, how they look like in Tosca. So here you can see lots of green, but we also have some red, which means we have errors as well. So this is highlighted here at the bottom, where you can see the cursor is right now, and you can see what actually happened here, what the issue is. There is a log file that's also given with that as well. So everything that is created during a test run, all the orders that are created, all these numbers, you can open separately also in a notepad. So this is something you would like to save somehow, want to give it to someone else, want to reuse that. That's obviously in Tosca, but this is also then on that kind of application. So the next part of our presentation is, so how do we actually apply everything that we've learned now in our SAP implementation? So we already had the question, when do we actually start with test automation if we look at our project lifecycle? And this is actually also going more into detail about it. So what I will show you next is how do we do test automation, or when do we start with test automation, with what kind of activities in which phase of our project. So we look at greenfield, and we also will look at brownfield. To start that, is there a question? Sorry.
Yes, there's a question if you would like to answer it now. So it says, is it possible to rerun the recording one has created, not only looking at the metadata recording, but the actual web windows like your video showed? So yes, you can rerun that, of course. You can record that, so as we did it, right? But you would always see the screenshots. So when you look at your results, for example, so one of the things, of course, you can rerun the test always, but you can look at the results, and there you would see the screenshots that the system has automatically taken when executed.
Yeah, and for you to know, so the video we showed you is a bit, I mean, we made it a bit faster, obviously, for you to see. And also some pauses are taken out of the video, but obviously, like Marco said, you can actually have a look at it again and reuse that. Okay, just to explain you how we do actually our greenfield approach, I have to jump in a little bit into our KPS methodology on how we do greenfield, so just that you understand what we are talking about in the next slides. Marco already mentioned it briefly. When we come and we do a greenfield implementation, we bring a lot of best practices with us. So we will bring a subset of processes that are our best practices for that specific area. We are looking at, we will bring a system with standard configuration as well, with documentation in Signavio, where we have the processes and the variants documented already. And we also bring tests that are automated. So our standard set, so the one you saw, for example, is one of our best practice processes, and we will bring that also already automated. That means the first day we come, we can actually already start testing it. So we have our system, we are able to execute the tests. This is obviously very helpful once you work on your solution, you develop it further, it's easy to adapt what is already there. And then you can use automation from the very, very beginning. So this is really like incorporated in our in our methodology on how we do greenfield projects, and we work there with Tricentis Tosca. We also have that if you go further in training with Enable Now, we have also documents already there, training material there for all the processes that are part of our best practice. So just as a reference for the next slide. On this slide, you can see our test automation.
I think there's a question about the data consistency. So how do you make sure consistent test data will work for the automation after a system refresh?
After a system refresh, so that we have the right data set in place, so the test data. Is that the question? I'm not sure if I understand correct.
Maybe, Andre, do you want to give it a go?
Yes. Just a question related to when you, in our landscape, we do a system copy of the Q environments, and then how do you make sure that the automated test scripts are working after that with the set of data that you have for the automated scripts?
Okay, so you build your test scripts or your test cases actually in a sense that you can change the data that's in there. So there is no fixed value of the data. So you don't really put the customer number, for example, in, you put like a value in, and that can be replaced. And then you have some sort of a data container that where you use data from. And if you have a refresh of your system, then you would have, before you start with it, with your automation again, of course, you have to renew then your data set that you want to use. And tell Tosca what kind of data should they use, and then they pick the data from the data container.
Okay, yeah. Is that much maintenance, like going through this test data container? Or have you tried to create some automated test scripts to actually create the test data?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we also do that. For example, for order creation, that's something that we actually start very early. If you look for example, in a greenfield approach S4, and you have a lot of sales orders that you need for your testing, that's actually one of these quick wins, I call it, that you can automate and use for your testing. So even if you want to do manual testing afterwards, you can use automation to generate the data. And also, obviously, to use it then for test automation. So that makes sense, yeah, to do that.
Okay. Is the automated test cases that creates the test data, is that updating the data container that is used for the other test scripts?
I don't think you can do that. Like you can actually update it like automatically in a sense. There's a manual step to do that in between, yeah.
Okay. So it's scripts that needs to run in advance of the main case or process.
Preparation, exactly. So usually also when you do manual testing, you would have some pre-steps you need to do in order to be able to run your test case, which is, for example, something needs to be created, right? Orders that have to be created. That's like a pre-step in order to do that. Yeah.
So that makes the life easier than actually maintaining the data container. Or
it makes it easier, yes, if you actually automate it, because then you have, if that's an activity, obviously that takes a lot of time and you have to do it all the time, then it definitely makes sense to automate it in the very beginning. And these resources who are doing that, they can actually focus on other testing activities during that time.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure. So coming back to this slide, so this is what this is supposed to show you is actually the difference between greenfield and brownfield when you talk about test automation. We have here the different phases just to explain it to you. So the colorful line activate is the activate methodology I think most of you have heard about. We mapped it with our KPS ideal methodology. We have our own methodology because we work with Activate, but we also have projects that are not SAP projects. So we have one methodology that fits all. And that's why we did some sort of a translation, so we know, where we are in that project, just as an explanation. So then let's imagine we have a greenfield. I showed you on the slide before, we bring a lot of stuff when we actually start a greenfield. So we identify the processes that are our best practices, and we identify already the customer specifics when we go into a preparation phase. That helps us obviously to already pick which automation scenarios we can use from our repository that we have, so we can set up the test tool. When we come in, we usually use Tricentis Tosca because that's like our standard tool we work with, and that's where we have our assets. But for instance, if we have a brownfield, so that's below there, we have to conduct first a maturity assessment. So we see where the quality assurance processes are at the moment. We would have a look into your test strategy. How is your test organization set up by now? What kind of test phases do you have? Who's involved in a project? How do you actually start your testing phase? What are the big assets? And we also look at the tool chain. Is there already something in place? Obviously, we can also work with other tools than Tosca if it makes sense, if that's something that has been proven and works for the client. We also use other tools, and we also have a look then at the test case repository. So often there are already test cases available, so we would have a look at the quality of the test cases, also how much is there, basically, let's put it that way. Do we have a full set? Do we have a modular approach that has been used for our test cases, so we can actually continue working with that? So that's all in the preparation phase. Then we would move into the explore phase. In the explore phase, in a greenfield, typically we start with creating a test strategy. This includes everything. So this includes also test automation. It can also already include regression testing at that point in time. Then we do a verification of identification deviations from SAP standards. So what's very customer specific, and we go really into detail. And so we can actually move on into the realization and then have that created. For brownfield, we would also look at the test strategy, might adapt it. In the brownfield, that's also the time that we start looking at data migration. So that's then the topic that comes up is actually conversions, right? So this is something we test manually at that point in time, because that would be the first time we're trying it out and the first time we're doing it. So this would be a manual test we are doing in the sandbox conversion. And we also actually start with isolated test automation of what's possible. So things that are already working, that are running, that we still need in our solution are things we can actually pick up at that point in time already for test automation before we even move into realization phase. Then when we go over into realization at the greenfield, we create the automation framework. So with the automation framework, it's very important that it's scalable. So we can make it anytime, we can make it bigger. So we start small with small sections with our quick wins, and then we actually make it bigger and bigger. So we, at some point, we can also automate our end-to-end scenarios. Then we adapt our cases that we already have that are close to the standard and create our use cases that really make sense for that point in time, where all the new realization and also the new developments, rise of objects are included as well. In the brownfield approach, we would have we would extend our automation ratio. So it's actually the same as we have in the greenfield. We have something already maybe, and now we want to extend it and see that everything that's been realized now, or like parts of it, everything is a bit over-exaggerated, I think, at that point in time, that parts of it can be automated as well. And then we go into the run phase. So, of course, we want to operationalization of our regression testing. We want to do that further. So we have to adapt the scope. We have to take our changes into the structure as well. And we have to create a governance around that. So we create something that is also future-proof for us. With this said, I'm coming to the last sentence here on the slide. So test automation, even in brownfield, is possible. So it's more, we think it's more challenging, obviously, because you have more, you have a different kind of landscape. You don't start from the beginning. It creates some more complexity, but we believe that there's also a big benefit, obviously, when you have a brownfield approach, that you start early with your test automation.
So we have one question that I see here. One of the questions I already answered in the chat, but there's another one. It says, would it also be possible to compare a test case result in quality systems, so which we executed in one system with the same result in another system like sandbox or production? So this is hard to answer because I think there is, out of the box, at least from the Tosca perspective, I don't know any capability that would do it from, out of the box. I think you have to do some sort of a step in between. You can, of course, use the result from one and the result of the other, but in order to compare it, I think you need more. You need to do some sort of more of a manual comparison step, at least from what I know. Yes, so that's the only thing I can answer right now to that. Yeah. Okay, I see a thumbs up, so
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then I move on to the next slide. So we talked about the topic of sustainability. So what is very important in test automation is that you keep your test cases up to date. We've also seen that that test automation was started, test cases were created, but then no one took care of it. And then after a year, you actually can't use them anymore because you have so many changes, or you actually have to rework them first in order to use them. So it is very important to be scalable and to be also future-proof with your assets you're creating. So what we are looking here is that if we have a release-driven run organization, which is for the SAP context here, which are the topics you have to look at in order to be sustainable. So one important point that also was one of our first slides is the topic of the governance. So it is important that you have a test center of excellence, which is IT driven. The test center of excellence gives the guidelines on how you do it. They give the right approach in order to have the strategy in place. Then you need a test automation specialist. Also important is our test manager authority in that whole process. So it's maybe someone from the test center of excellence or another person that is working on the project, who keeps it all together. And then we also have test data management as an important topic. So for those who have experience with test management, you know that test data can really be an issue and can really be a blocking issue at the beginning of a test or even during a test. So it is very important to have someone who has control over the test data. And also very important is to bring in the business experts early. So the business experts are the ones who know how the process runs, and they are actually the ones who are writing the case somehow, right? So they are writing the business test case, and that's actually your basis for everything. Then you have to integrate that into your test process. So what we do is we establish a plan for maintaining and updating automated tests. What does that mean? It means we know when a release comes, we know we might know already the changes that are in that release, and therefore we can create a plan in order to say when do we spend time to maintain our tests and which tests have to be updated with that. So you also should do regular reviews to change your test cases. And we say we actually go, we have the approach of a risk-based test design. Another important topic is change impact analysis. So to have a tool that helps you. So there are some tools on the market, also from Tricentis, that enable you to see changes that are made in your S4 environment. So the tool has a look at what's the content of your transport that is supposed to go in the system, and can tell you which test cases are affected, which tests you have to execute in order to make sure that the change doesn't have a negative impact, or even to see if it has a negative impact and to fix it before you set it to production. Then understand the impact of the changes before they occur, and select and adapt your test automation scope according to the impact analysis. So always rework it. If you see there are actually issues coming up many times, make sure you always run that test case. Have some sort of a prioritization of your cases in order to see what's important. Yeah. Okay. Then we actually come to our last slide. So this is these are our key takeaways. And with those key takeaways, we want to wrap up that session. So for us, these are actually the most important topics, and we hope that you take them with you when you leave that webinar today. So for us, it's super important that we enable test automation S4, transforming from the very beginning. So I think we mentioned it a couple of times. Back in the days, there was that approach that we said, okay, the solution has to be very proven. There aren't many changes anymore, and that's when we start to automate. I hope you got that feeling today that we say this is not up to date anymore with the technology we have with test tools or test automation tools like Tricentis. We can start very early and support also during our first manual testing with test automation. Then we start with small accelerators. That's also something we discussed. So as early as possible, and small brackets that we enlarge during our cycle. Then model-based automation. So we want to have building blocks in order to create our end-to-end scenarios with them. That's also very important. Reusability, keep them up to date, that they fit to most of your scenarios. Then establish a governance, very important. Make sure that the changes that are going into your test cases are validated, that this is that they stay up to date, and that we have that we can manage the automation from an end-to-end perspective. Foster collaboration sounds like something obviously we want that the development and the testing team works together. In practice, that can be sometimes difficult, so it's really important that you focus on that we have a strong connection between the development team and the testing team, so we know when something comes in, that there is the communication in between. The development knows, okay, I'm doing something, I need to tell my test automation specialist, I have some changes here, so they can validate if a test case has to be updated. Then also a very important point, we haven't really talked about that yet, is that we focus on the overall software quality. So always keep your QA process, the whole QA process in mind, not just the automation. So automation wouldn't completely replace your manual testing. So it actually should, you can automate parts of it, but we don't see that if we have an S/4HANA implementation, for example, that manual testing can totally replace the automation parts of it. So keep in mind that you don't just look at that, but also think about how do you make your manual testing more efficient, and how can my test automation actually support that. With that, we are at the end. If there aren't any questions right now, we say thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we're still available for questions.
We're open for questions, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? No?
It was an excellent presentation. Absolutely. Comment from Eva Maja. Absolutely excellent. Very pedagogic and nice. And I had one who actually said that she wasn't able to get in, so I will send her the recording as soon as possible, and then I sent her that she could send her questions on email then.
Yes, of course.
Okay, super. Then thanks, Bianca. Thanks, Marco. Thanks all from who joined the webinar. Thanks for all the questions, and I wish you a nice Friday and a nice weekend.
Yes.
Have a nice day, all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.